In 2008, millions of Americans discovered something in the span of about 6 weeks. Their home lost value. Their retirement account dropped by 30%. Their employer announced a hiring freeze. Their home equity line of credit was suspended. 4 separate things. 4 things they had been told were independent of each other, moved in the same direction at the same time for the same underlying reason. Not bad luck, not poor planning, structure. That's the mechanism this episode is about. Most of us build our financial lives on what feel like solid, independent pillars. Save. Invest for the long term. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Secure, dependable employment. Acquire real estate. Plan for retirement. We diversify across industries, geographies, asset classes, a 401k, a house, a stable job, some index funds. Each one feels distinct. Each one feels like a separate layer of protection. This is what prudent financial behavior looks like. This is what every advisor, every column, every dinner table conversation reinforces. And for long stretches, it works. Everything rises. The home appreciates. The portfolio grows. The job feels secure. The whole thing hums along, and you feel correctly based on all available evidence that you are doing it right. But there's a quiet tension underneath that comfort. You've seen it briefly in the moments when a market correction didn't just hit one sector, it hit everything. When a regional layoff wave didn't just affect one company, it affected the neighborhood, the school district, the local businesses, the property values. When the things you were told were uncorrelated moved together, suddenly and completely, as if they had been waiting for a signal. They had. Just not the kind anyone told you to watch for. The mechanism is called hidden correlation, and its terminal expression is correlated collapse. It is the inverse of true diversification. On the surface, you see distinct, independent assets. You believe your job security is separate from your home value, which is separate from your retirement fund. But underneath these visible components are invisible threads, common factors, shared vulnerabilities that link them all. Not through conspiracy, through the far more powerful force of optimization. Here is the origin. Early financial models were built on the idea of independent risk. If one investment goes down, another goes up. Diversify across sectors, and you're protected. As these models became sophisticated and institutions scaled, the drive for efficiency led to standardization. Everyone starts using similar data, similar algorithms, similar definitions of best practice. Regulators, trying to prevent individual bank failures, impose rules that inadvertently push all banks towards similar assets and similar risk assessments. This creates a herd not through stupidity, but through rational compliance within a perceived framework of safety. The result is an architecture where a shock to one element resonates through components that were supposed to be unrelated. In stable periods, the hidden links reinforce each other. Everything rises together. Your home value, your stock portfolio, your job security all seem to be thriving independently. This creates the illusion, the feeling of individual competence being rewarded, the sense that your specific choices, your particular fund selection, your specific neighborhood, your industry are what's working. They might be, but they are also all floating on the same tide, and you can't see the tide. Then, an unexpected shock hits one of the underlying factors. A sudden shift in interest rates, a supply chain disruption, a technology that makes an entire category of work obsolete. Because of the hidden correlation, the shock doesn't affect one sector. It ripples through all the secretly linked components. Simultaneously, that diversified portfolio moves as one. That stable job market faces layoffs because the regional economy was more concentrated than it appeared. The home value drops because local employment thins out. and mortgage rates spike at the same moment, affecting both supply and demand from the same direction. At the same time, the equity line gets frozen. The bonus disappears. The severance negotiation happens in a down market, not four problems. One problem, wearing four faces. Let's make this real. Picture a couple, call them the Holloways. Ellen is 57, a regional director at a financial services firm. $195,000 a year. Her husband Tom retired early at 60, drawing from a pension tied to his former employer in the energy sector. They have no children at home. Their net worth, on paper, looks exceptional. A paid-off home in a desirable suburb worth roughly $1.1 million, a combined investment portfolio of about $1.6 million split across index funds and a brokerage account, and Tom's pension providing $3,800 a month. They feel, with some justification, that they are ahead. They have layers. They have redundancy. They have done the work. What they don't see is where the threads connect. Ellen's firm serves institutional clients, pension funds, endowments, regional banks. Many of those clients are concentrated in industries tied to the same regional economy where the Holloways live and own property. Tom's former employer, the source of his pension, has significant exposure to energy infrastructure bonds instruments that are highly sensitive to interest rate movements. The index funds in their portfolio are market cap weighted, meaning despite holding hundreds of companies, they are effectively concentrated in the same large cap financial and tech stocks that dominate the broader market. Their neighborhood's property values are supported by a cluster of employers, several of which are, directly or indirectly, clients of Ellen's firm. In good times, none of this is visible. Everything is working. Everything feels independent. The pension arrives on schedule. The portfolio grows. The neighborhood stays desirable. Ellen's firm wins renewals. Tom plays golf and doesn't think about interest rates. Then rates rise sharply in a compressed window. Energy infrastructure financing tightens. Tom's former employer enters restructuring. The pension isn't eliminated, but cost of living adjustments are suspended indefinitely. And there's a clause in the plan documents neither of them had read carefully that governs exactly this scenario. Simultaneously, Ellen's institutional clients begin extending contract timelines and pulling back on discretionary fees because their own portfolios are under pressure from the same rate environment. Her firm responds with a restructuring of its own. Ellen, at 57, is offered an early retirement package that is not quite optional. The neighborhood, where 3 of the major local employers are quietly contracting, sees its first flat quarter of home values in a decade. The equity line they never used gets quietly reduced by the bank standard practice in a tightening credit environment. Nothing collapsed. No single catastrophic event. No moment they could point to and say, "That's where we went wrong." Just 4 simultaneous, quiet slowdowns, all tracing back to the same underlying exposure to interest rate sensitivity and regional economic concentration. 4 things they had been told were independent. 4 threads. 1 pull. Let's run the numbers. And these are illustrative, run your own against your actual situation. If Tom's pension cost of living adjustment is suspended for 3 years, that's a hypothetical loss of around $13,700 in purchasing power over that period, small in isolation, but it's the first time in their planning that a guaranteed income stream behaved in a way it was never supposed to. If Ellen's income drops from $195,000 to $0 for 18 months before she secures equivalent work, the household absorbs roughly $292,000 in lost income, minus whatever the early retirement package covered. The package sounds substantial when it's offered. It rarely looks that way 14 months later. If the portfolio, instead of growing at a hypothetical 7% annually, returns 1% during the same period of rate-driven market pressure, the opportunity cost on $1.6 million over 3 years is roughly $280,000, not a loss. An absence of expected growth, which, when you're 57 and the window for compounding is narrowing, is not a philosophical distinction. It's a material one. And if the home appreciates at 0% instead of a hypothetical 4% annually, that's another $132,000 in unrealized equity over 3 years. Cumulatively, across 4 channels they considered independent pension income, employment income, investment growth, home equity, the Holloways face a hypothetical gap of over $700,000 between where their planning said they would be and where they are. Not from a single bad decision, not from negligence or recklessness, from a single hidden correlation playing out simultaneously across every layer of a life carefully constructed to be safe. This mechanism scales far beyond individual households. The global supply chain, meticulously optimized for efficiency over decades, looked from the outside like extraordinary diversification. Thousands of suppliers across dozens of countries, multiple shipping routes, redundant manufacturing capacity, and yet, when a single variable shifted pandemic-era port closures, then a ship blocking the Suez Canal, then semiconductor shortages, the entire system seized simultaneously, not because of bad design, because the optimization itself had created hidden correlation. Every node had been made lean. Every buffer had been removed. The efficiency was real. So was the fragility it created. Consider a regional economy that concentrates around a single industry, advanced manufacturing, or tech, or energy. Banks lend against it. Schools train for it. Local government taxes it. Real estate prices it in. Retailers serve the people employed by it. Every one of these looks like a separate sector. None of them are. They are all downstream of the same single assumption that the industry continues. When it doesn't, the collapse isn't sequential. It's simultaneous. Jobs, property values, tax revenue, lending, retail, all of it at once. This is the pattern: perceived diversification, hidden concentration, correlated collapse. There's a subtler version of this that operates at the individual level and almost never gets named. High earners and diligent savers are often the most exposed, not despite their competence, but because of it. They have followed the system's instructions precisely. They have maximized the tools the system offers. The 401k, the home equity, the employer stock options, the professional network concentrated in a single industry. Each tool is real. Each benefit is real, but the tools are not independent. The 401k is often heavily weighted toward the same sector the employer operates in. The home equity is tied to the same regional economy as the employer. The professional network, the thing that would theoretically provide options if the job disappears, is concentrated among people facing the same conditions at the same time for the same reasons. When the shock comes, the network can't help. Not because the people aren't willing, because they are all absorbing the same hit simultaneously. This is correlated collapse at the personal scale. The more carefully you built inside the system's prescribed channels, the more completely those channels share a single fault line. The institutions who manage and broker these correlated exposures are not unaware of this. Risk models at large financial firms identify these correlations constantly. The challenge is structural. Acting on that knowledge, actually reducing exposure to hidden correlation, would mean recommending strategies that diverge from the consensus, that underperform in the long stable periods that precede every collapse. And, in an industry where performance is measured quarterly, where advisors are evaluated against benchmarks that reflect the very consensus they would need to diverge from. The incentive to surface hidden correlation before it becomes visible is almost non-existent. The system rewards conformity. It rewards the herd. And it does so consistently enough, for long enough, that the herd feels like wisdom. This is the pattern. Perceived diversification, hidden concentration, correlated collapse, and then crucially perceived recovery as the same channels rebuild in the same configuration because the incentives that created them never changed. So what does true resilience actually look like in this landscape? It doesn't start with different fund names on a statement. It starts with a question most financial planning conversations never ask. What are the underlying assumptions that would have to fail simultaneously for multiple parts of my life to deteriorate at once? What is the single thread, if pulled, that unravels more than one thing? For the Holloways, it was interest rate sensitivity. For others, it's regional employment concentration. For others still, it's sector exposure disguised as diversification tech-heavy index funds held by someone who works in tech, lives in a tech-adjacent real estate market, and whose professional options are concentrated among other tech industry peers. The reframe isn't pessimistic. It isn't about expecting collapse or retreating from the systems that genuinely provide stability most of the time. It's about distinguishing between the appearance of diversification and its substance, between holding many things with different names and holding things with genuinely different underlying exposures, between the feeling of security, which the system is very good at producing, and the structural capacity to absorb a correlated shock. The system isn't built to show you this. It's built to show you the names, the fund names, the asset classes, the job titles, not the underlying exposures. Because as long as the names look diverse, the machine keeps running, capital flows into predictable channels, fees are collected, products are sold. The incentive to maintain the illusion of diversification is enormous and widely distributed across everyone who profits from your continued participation in it. True resilience isn't a number on a statement. It's the capacity to absorb a shock in one area without it cascading into everything else. It's the condition where four things can move at once and you are not destroyed by the coincidence. Most people don't build toward that condition because no one sells it. It doesn't fit on a product sheet. It doesn't have a ticker symbol. It exists in the gap between what the system offers and what the system doesn't tell you to ask for. And the first step toward it isn't a new product. It's a different question. Not, what do I own? But, what would have to go wrong in more than one place at the same time for all of this to move in the same direction? And am I exposed to exactly that? The most dangerous debt isn't on your credit card. It's the life you borrowed. When was the last time you asked yourself not which assets you own, but what single assumption, if wrong, would make all of them move in the same direction? Most people who see this mechanism for the first time ask the same follow-up. If the institutions managing these systems can see the correlations, why don't they act on them? The answer to that question reaches further than any individual portfolio. It reaches into who benefits from the stability lasting as long as it does and what happens to them when it doesn't.